A few days after patch 4.1, there was a huge tournament called Area Cup in Japan, which was incredibly stacked this time around, even having a few strong Western teams like Jackpot in it. It was honestly one of my favorite tournaments to watch, and I'd really recommend checking it out. And there were also a lot of new things to look at when it comes to analyzing the meta and what might be changing. So today, I'm going to show you guys what top players were testing in this tournament, explanations for why stuff could have been picked, and my overall thoughts on how this is going to shape the meta for the future. If you like this kind of analytical content, be sure to subscribe, and let's get started. Let me get the obvious one out of the way. One thing didn't really change. Zap is still absolutely everywhere. We saw some Tri Nouveau over it, and a bit of Pencil, which I'll talk about in the next section, but pretty much no comps ditched to Cooler, even though there were significantly less inkjets. I think it does make sense given the comps we saw were still very aggressive, and there were other specials that are more powerful at getting kills, such as Trizooka being played. There may be a chance we see some coolerless comps attempted with less ballpoint, but for now it's hard to say. Let's start things off by looking at backlines. Pretty much every team before this patch was running ballpoint most of the time as their anchor weapon. Backless comps or other backlines being used was pretty rare, and that's mostly because inkjet has been the best special in the game. It's one of the best things to get your team back in, and because everyone's running Tacticooler to mitigate deaths from the inkjet, you are going down a lot and need somewhere to jump to, and that inkjet recall is also perfect for that. The main weapon itself also provides very valuable crossfire for getting shorter range weapons in. After this patch, not only was ballpoint's inkjet output lowered, but the hitbox size of the inkjet explosion was reduced by 15%. Inkjet still seems pretty strong, and ballpoint's more than capable of getting enough of it, but this tournament we saw quite a lot of teams experimenting running without one, and with plenty of success. I don't think ballpoint's going to drop off that much by any means, but it definitely seems more feasible to run things other than ballpoint, and here's a few of what we saw. Both Rapid and Rapid Pro saw some solid use. I'll talk a bit about blasters later because they're a bit higher as a whole, but these backlines provide solid chip damage, can control space well, and have specials that are helpful to get their team in. Both heavy spotling saw some use, with the Kraken one being for more aggressive team compositions, and the regular one is kind of a more standard backline. Heavy in particular is really difficult to kill compared to ballpoint, as both of its specials can do a good job keeping it alive, and it has a more consistently fast fire rate at longer ranges. I'll also say that we saw a heavy plus rapid deco combo that seemed pretty strong and was rather interesting. We saw a bit more of Firefin and the vanilla charger with ink vacuums buffs that I'll have to get to later. V-Jet was also seen due to the vacuum buffs, and Nautilus was played a little bit, mainly by Biscuit from one of the Western Japanese pickups, Flippa Floppa. Nautilus has been seeing an increase of use lately, and this patch probably helped it. Considering the increase in things like shooters from stuff like the Splattershot and NZAP buffs, having more of those weapons that Not is very good into is nice for that weapon. Finally, one of the more common backlines is Snipe Rider, which I've seen some people being a bit confused about as to how it's so good right now. However, its main problems was always that it got cooler, which wasn't really valuable in crab meta and, well, had terrible object damage. But there's barely ever multiple crabs on the same team anymore, and not many other HP specials are that strong or common right now, so it doesn't really have to deal with that weakness. And at the same time, it can get cooler arguably faster than Zap at times, provides very nice paint support, especially for weaker painting weapons like blasters, since it paints very far away from itself, and has very good matchups against a lot of other backlines and inkjet itself. Beyond backlines though, we also saw backless comps that mainly came with two different weapons being played with them. Wiper Deco, which we saw quite a lot of in this tournament, and Custom Dually Sculpture. It seems like being able to invest in a beacon option is very strong for these comps, as it makes the advantage state really oppressive and is good for keeping momentum. It's mainly because one person doesn't have to be responsible to give cooler jumps, and you can have even more people rushing in and fighting, and both missiles and the newly buffed Super Chump seem to be sufficient entry tools, so those comps aren't lacking too much in that regard. That is a lot of different mid to backline options that are being ran as their longest range weapon on their team comp, and it's been pretty interesting to see. For blasters, in particular, range and rapid deco are a lot more common. I saw quite a bit of teams with one of these in their comps. This was definitely more towards the groups part of the tournament, as in the later part of the bracket, especially for Range Blaster, there weren't too many. But there seems to be a lot of players giving a shot at these kind of weapons. And even V-Blast was seeing some use. Range Blaster and Rapid do have good matchups against midline weapons and solid kits. With Cooler, both of these weapons have the ability to fight with no jump RNG and have Special Saver, which drastically helps their output. This meta definitely seems like one of the better ones for Blaster to be a part of, but time will tell to see if they're a staple or just a pick that Blaster players will be able to make work. Let's get to the thumbnail one. Is Vacuum good? We saw quite a lot of vacuum play, mainly Rusu from Melon's team. While the Blaster has the same issues it did before, it also has a lot more playmaking potential now, and can clutch fights or even cap zone in many of these situations. The shot that comes out of it is much more comparable to something like Booyah Bomb in terms of its radius size, even if it's not as big, and it comes with the ability to block for teammates. This was played with a few teams. Q used Vacuum with both V-Charger and V-Jet for Jackpot, who managed to get into top 8 before going out, and of course Rusu that I mentioned earlier ended up actually winning the tournament, pretty much only locking V-Jet. While it seems to find some early success, and let some weapons like Jet Squelcher that have had weaker kits before be picked more, it may be susceptible to counterpicks. This tournament was zones only, and the ability to cap many of these zones is a bit more important here, but there are also other weapons that could be picked to deal with it more. Stamper and Vanilla Wiper come to mind in particular. Not only can the main weapons kill through it quite easily, but they have specials that can also do that. At least if the shooters don't shoot you through either of those. Crab Tank also saw some success into the Vacuum, but it's a bit more risky. If they're able to just tank the Vacuum to get some damage and go behind a wall, you've basically just given them a giant nuclear bomb they're going to launch across the stage. There's definitely a lot more risk reward when it comes to actually choosing to fill the Vacuum or not. Ignoring it can allow people on the other team to take some space, while filling it gives them a powerful shot. It's going to take some time to see just how powerful this special is, and there's plenty of people that have some doubts, including me honestly. I think people will get better at fighting the special as the matchups continue, but I think the main thing to see is this isn't something you can just quickly fill up and then just let it do nothing and move on. Filling up the Vacuum is now something that gives a powerful part of the special, and teams will have to be very coordinated in how they fill the special, trying to kill the user before the shot comes out, or ignoring it and going for other targets if possible, similar to how people would fight against Kraken. We'll have to see if the strengths of this new shot are able to play out well, especially in the other modes in the future. Speaking of wipers, there were quite a lot of these. While Wiper is pretty common in the Western scene, in Japan there honestly haven't been that many of them, and this was the first tournament to really see a lot of them. Vanilla Wiper can be nice for aggressive plays as it has a kit more suited to it, and Hammer in particular could be nice with the increased amount of vacuums. However, the main one we see is Wiper Deco for those kind of backless comps, though it can definitely work in comps with the backline as well. Its ability to get and use missiles to get in for its team has been really useful, and the weapon is really fast to be able to keep up and not really picky with what plays around it, as it doesn't have any major weaknesses other than its kill time. It also works much better with quick respawn compared to something like Splatoon Stamper that generally wants to avoid that in its gear builds. If backless comps do become popular, this is probably the weapon that will see the best chance of being able to use it. While there was only one prominent Tent user in this tournament, Chikashi playing with Pixio monsters, I think Tent seems a lot better. Both of them got indirect buffs to their specials, and they seem to be a bit more consistent as a whole. The weapon was already solid before this boost, but less jetpacks are already a nice start for it. In addition, the Zooka buffs make it much more reliable at getting picks, and since this weapon could already have better Zooka positions with the Tent Shield, it's very nice for it, and similar goes to Ink Vacuum. Between the beacons and the Vacuum itself, Tent has a lot of tools to stay alive, and I especially remember their Flounder game against Jackpot, where after the retake, the vanilla Tent was able to live pretty much the whole time. With the buffed Ink Vacuum as well as a Tent Shield, it's really hard to take that weapon out. Having access to 2 solid kits instead of just one, especially those that offer different properties, are really useful, and it's yet another beacon option we could be seeing. I do think this is another weapon that's susceptible to being counterpicked by Wiper though, so if that becomes more common, we'll have to see if Tent players have a way to deal with it. Another special that got reasonable buffs is Super Chump. So does it work as an entry tool now? Well, while they don't seem super strong, it's definitely a lot better, especially in zones where the paint could be useful on the objective. The new combo that's been added from the inside hit of Chumps comboing with the outside boosts their lethality a lot, especially with the larger radius. This means that Chumps can't really be ignored, and if you're able to force people to fight in the Chumps, they're going to have to shoot them down. While that doesn't take too long, it's still a bit of time that's going to be taken away from shooting at your players. I will say the main utility of this special is when the Chumps land, they give you a lot of paint already, and then paint again when they explode, especially for weapons that don't paint as much, like blasters. It's really nice for them, especially given that they can better combo off the damage in this patch. However, for teams doing custom dually sculpture, it's definitely good enough to pick the weapon and have it help as an entry tool. Trizooka was another special that was buffed. While this one doesn't seem too significant outside of just how good Melon is at Zooka, I mean those grands, quads, and triples were insane, it still seems to have some consistency problems, and there were quite a bit of Zookas that still didn't really do too much. I would say the main thing though is having that AoE hitbox is useful. If you shoot at someone who your team is running at, you're much more likely to deal that extra damage. And in particular, I think it's really nice for weapons like Blaster and Slosher to be able to combo off of. I think we'll see more of this, particularly from V-Shot and Squeezer, since those are both quite strong weapons right now. Shot can get a bit more of them and be more aggressive, while Squeezer absolutely dominates matchups in the mid-range. Before going into the winning team, I will say most solid weapons here are fine. We saw some stuff like Machine, 96 Deco, 52 Gal, Slosher, and of course Splash being decently common. The only weapon we didn't see too much of is Anarchy Nova, which isn't too surprising. It's made to spam a special that got worse. Moving to top 4, there were 2 triple shooter teams, which got memed on a little bit. And while that might seem concerning, I think it's fine. There was still some flexibility here, and part of this was just to pick V-Jet for Vacuum, which is far from the only option we saw using it. In addition, I can safely say the playstyle of triple shooter is nothing like Splatoon 2. There's not really much passive special camping. I hope that we don't see too much of this in the future, but I think teams will adapt just fine. Out of the top 4 teams, I gotta also shout out Pixio Monsters for being quite flexible. While they do have a 10 player who pretty much exclusively sticks it, the other 3 are wildly flexible. We've seen their backline go from things like Heavy, Ballpoint, and Snipe Rider. Yeah, they have both a charger and someone who can switch to Splatlings. And this team in particular runs some really weird comps. One I found really interesting was on Hammerhead Zones with 96 Cal Deco, Sorella Tenebrella, Heavy Deco, and V-Shot. With the Wall, Tent Shield, and 2 Krakens, that comp was really hard to take out on the advantage state, and the double Trizooka could be really annoying to get random picks while everything else was stalling it out. It was only one match, so there's not too much to go off here, but it's cool to see a top-level team really experimenting with what they can get away with. The winning team, though, with Melon, Ryukun, Rusu, and Ku, mainly ran the custom dually squelchers, V-Jet, Shot, and Zap85 for pretty much the whole tournament. Melon was absolutely going crazy on the front line, and that shot accuracy buff does seem to help its reliability, with the Zookas absolutely making great plays. The V-Jet played mostly defensive to give jumps in, but the vacuums are used much more aggressively here. Mainly there was one example on Hammerhead Bridge against Flippa-Floppa, where they basically used it as a way to push in, since Flippa-Floppa was split with 1 player on the left side and 3 on the right. That got them an early pick and way too much momentum. Being able to quickly jump on opportunities to use vacuum aggressively was definitely something V-Jet was able to play to a strong suit, and it got quite a lot of that special. I think as a whole, the comp just played very fast, was moving around constantly, and had a lot of paint control and special output, which was very strong. The beacons were also pretty nice to get back in, and they did end up 3-0ing in Grand Finals, so congrats to them. So yeah, this tournament had a lot of experimentation. I don't think the core of the meta is going to change too much unless backlist comps completely outperform Ballpoint, which I'm unsure about long term. It's cool to see an event this early where teams are really trying to test what can work and what kind of stuff they want to do, and the main trend is that more things are just kind of working right now. We saw a bit of blasters that can work against new comps and be nice against Trizooka, Chump, and VAC seem easier to pick and have more use cases and are allowing more weapons with those to be picked. And in general, it seems like there's a lot of options worth taking a look at, and I think it's safe to say that this patch will be more diverse, and the main benefit is definitely the special balance. But let me know if you guys are enjoying this new meta below, and I'll see you guys next time.